So 6 weeks into Liz Truss being Prime Minister, a sentence which I still can't believe I'm really saying.
6 weeks already?
It's been 6 weeks already, yeah. Obviously, the Queen's death put a sort of spanner in the works of the start of her tenure, and that's all we were talking about. But it also doesn't quite seem real that we refer to her as Prime Minister, because she's not very statesmanly at all. She's a non-asset. At least with Boris, you knew he was in the job. Liz Truss is kind of a non-entity, increasingly a non-entity, because she's been forced to sack her Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, over the bad optics of his corporation and top-rate tax cuts, and also revoking the cap on bankers' bonuses. So the media basically cajoled her into axing her Truss-onomics.
So just as a quick pause on that, I think the bankers' bonuses was the only thing that really hit them.
Didn't like. Yeah,
I didn't like it either.
No.
And the rest of it, I think they could have just stood on and been like, "Now get bent."
Yeah, I think if they did more than a slight tax rate cut for the lower echelons, they would have gotten away with it.
Yeah.
And also they just need to be able to double down. But it's a lesson on Conservative Party optics, and don't be an apologist to the media, which you once accurately characterised as dirty, dirty smear merchants.
Yes.
They still haven't learned that lesson. Instead, twice failed Prime Ministerial candidate and former Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt has now taken the job.
Oh, great.
Yeah, but his career history and his home life, of all things, actually paints quite a disturbing picture for the prospect as to whether or not he is a captured Chinese asset. So I thought we'd go through it today. Speaking of something that hasn't been captured by the Chinese, given it's our, 2-year anniversary, for the next week, this video is free. We will get to choose a piece of content over on the website, and I chose my discussion with John Wheatley on Studio Ghibli, and it's the first part of 2, so hopefully that tantalises you enough to subscribe for the second bit, because that's equally as good. But we discuss things like Spirited Away, Mononoke, and my favourite Howl's Moving Castle, so go over and watch that for the week that it's up, because I know plenty of people like the YouTube clips. Anyway, so, starting off first, Kwasi Kwarteng resigned. Yeah, this is his letter, innit? He's saying, you asked me to stand aside as Chancellor, I have accepted. When you asked me to serve as your Chancellor, I did so in the full knowledge that the situation we face was incredibly difficult, with rising global interest rates and energy prices. However, your vision of optimism, growth and change was right. As I have said many times in the past weeks, following the status quo was simply not an option. For too long, this country has been dogged by low growth rates and high taxation. That must still change if the country is to succeed.
I mean, I agree with him,
Yes.
but that's hardly the complete sum of the problem.
No, as we were talking off air, it's an entirely, and I understand he's the Chancellor, but it's an entirely materialist economic dimension.
Yeah.
It speaks nothing about how the cultural fabric decaying means that people cannot adopt better economic conditions if we're infighting about fundamental truths. The interesting thing is, as well, after we put this out, Liz Truss, in her address to the country, said that he had taken the decision to resign, but at the top it says, you've asked me to stand aside as Chancellor. Yeah, so there's a bit of infighting within the cabinet as to who wields the blade there. So if we can pop on to the next one. So just before I discuss this bit, I just wanted to articulate that King Charles obviously approved Jeremy Hunt to be the new Chancellor, Edward Argar to become Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and Chris Philip, MP as the Paymaster General. So the reason that he was ousted is because of press stuff like this. And thank you, John, for forwarding me this about a week ago. In Fortune, this was an article saying Liz Truss would be so bad for the UK, a former central bank official says that it's time to bring back George Soros's classic and short the pound.
Because, of course, that's what he did in the 90s, wasn't it?
Yeah, so openly endorsing to circumvent, I suppose we call it the democratic will of the people. We've been through so many prime ministers at this point that it's a uniparty state. And just openly crashing the economy to get the desired result. It's like when Bill Maher once said, I hope there's a recession when Trump comes into power.
Yeah, but as I recall, I remember looking into Soros shorting the pound a while ago, and he literally just made off with a huge amount of money at the expense of the British taxpayer.
Yes, he also did some immoral things that allowed him to enrich himself when he was younger, according to his own autobiography, but I suppose we shouldn't discuss that here. There's also a movement within the Conservative Party itself, and this isn't mentioned in this article, but it's been floating around, that the Conservative Party are attempting to interchange Truss, and now Jeremy Hunt, I suppose, with Rishi Sunak and Penny Mordaunt, just sneak her in. And the plan is, as Tobias Ellwood has said, is to change the rules with the 1922 committee so that rather than Truss being unable to be challenged for the next 11 months of her prime ministership, unless she resigns, she won't go anywhere, it's to make it so that members can't choose the prime minister or the leader of the party, de facto. It's that only the MPs would, and that's something William Hague said as well. So you're seeing like sedition by the elitists. And Tobias Ellwood actually has already said, I want to rejoin the EU.
But it just feels like fighting over who gets the nicest deck chair on the Titanic.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This is obviously
exactly
a
it.
sinking ship
Yeah.
filled with mediocre people.
Yeah, well, we said off air, again, we can see the dominoes lining up to be fallen. So if they try and do that, if they supplant that, what will happen is people will be outraged both within and without the membership. So there'll be a general election and they'll lose. And even at the Tory party conference, the prevailing air was a defeat is impending. And either they were going to get drunk and cope, which Penny Mordaunt did herself, screeching like a wine aunt, or a bunch of MPs, even like Lee Anderson, for example, are kind of taking it on the chin and going, well, we kind of need some time in exile to regather and point to the neolibs and say, you did this, let's be actual Conservatives. But it's going to take 5 years of very bad Labour governance to do that.
One thing I think that future Conservatives might want to think about is how many of your Conservative leaders don't have kids? Conservative leaders don't have kids. Penny Mordaunt doesn't have children. How are these people in any way treated seriously as Conservatives?
Do they have an investment in the continuity of the country?
Exactly. What's their investment in the future? None.
Speaking of defiling the continuity of the country and bad optics, maybe one of the reasons Kwasi Kwarteng didn't handle the job all that well, we're not going to play the video, is this. Have you seen this before?
He was laughing at the Queen's funeral, wasn't he?
Yeah, this was during the moment of silence, and he genuinely looks like he's on something.
Yeah.
I've seen other politicians at Tory party conference be on suspected substances, but it's very weird to be cackling during the moment of mourning for our monarch. It's just unbecoming.
I mean, it's really bad.
Yeah, and again, the optics weren't so great at the dispatch box either, so he has been axed for more than just the perception of his financial policies. So if we can go on to the next one, what is a Jeremy Hunt chancellorship shaping up to be? So he just did a little Twitter announcement, which you can go and watch on Her Majesty's Treasury, but it's basically the same thing in here. This is all speculative at the time of publishing, but it's basically turned out to be true. He'll also have a press conference this afternoon at time of recording on Monday. Basically, the 1% income tax rate from 20% basic rate to 19% that was due to be in next year has been suspended indefinitely. All the other planned tax cuts, including the VAT-free shopping for tourists, has been cancelled.
Why? Why? Is that... oh, by the way, we're Conservatives. We're going to oppose a tax cut. That's going to go down well with the electorate.
His argument is that there's about 60 billion in fiscal tightening that needs to be sourced from increasing taxes and reducing spending. So more quote-unquote austerity measures that can be hit on by the left.
Brilliant. Great.
And as you've said off air, he's a Cameron Tory. Are we shocked he's making the same mistakes? Yeah. Also, the energy price cap has been extended only until April. So we've got no long-term plan yet because the Treasury Ledge Review is meant to, quote, design a new approach to reducing energy bills, which basically means more net zero policies by the back door. Right. The national insurance rise is the only thing that has been scrapped, like the Rishi Sunak's plan to hike it. They've said, okay, no, we'll keep that scrapping plan. Same with the corporation tax rate. They're gonna increase it again.
Oh, good news for British business.
Yeah. So if we go on to the next one, the interesting thing about that is actually this was a Sunak policy conspired by Janet Yellen. I wrote about this for a while ago for the American Spectator, and I'll let people read it in their own time. But basically, it was agreed to be a 15% minimum to a corporate tax rate, and now they're incrementally increasing it as they go along. I think Ireland was the only country that dissented, saying, no, we want to race to the bottom to encourage people to come. But then they whipped them back in line, and it seems some very conspiratorial global strong-arming happening there. And ironically, now the corporate tax rate in this country, and I know a big fan of big corporations, but it's going to be higher than what Jeremy Corbyn proposed on the 2019 campaign trail. Yeah,
you know what? There's a strain of thought in the distant right. It's like, well, maybe it would have been better if Jeremy Corbyn was in charge, and I hate it that facts are conspiring to prove them right.
Yeah, it seems that we wouldn't have had too many different results, would we? I mean, we were all under house arrest and had a state-planned economy for how many years, and it resulted as it does in many other socialist states. But I don't think we should be too tentative on just talking about Hunt's economics, because he is holding the second most, at least public-facing, powerful position in the country. And so let's look at Jeremy Hunt's public policy endorsement record. Let's look at this video, shall we, John?
I very much agree with the central point in Gabriel's paper that we should be aiming for zero infection and elimination of the disease, because that is basically the approach taken in countries which have a SARS strategy as opposed to a flu strategy. And those are the countries that have overwhelmingly been the most successful in tackling coronavirus. My sister lives in Beijing, and she flew back to Beijing in the middle of lockdown. And just to give you an idea of the contrast, she was escorted from the airport in Beijing to her home by Ministry of Health officials, and then put into her home for 2 weeks quarantine. The door was sealed, and she had a police car sitting outside her house periodically. And I'm not saying we go that far in this country, but I just think it's an indication of how serious they are in the countries that have had to deal with SARS about stopping at the root every possible source of infection.
That little disgusting lies smirk he has
Yeah.
on his face. I'm not saying we go that far. You are saying it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be bringing any of this
Absolutely.
up.
Yes, yeah. So
You
he's saying
liar.
that basically we should treat every single citizen with the same contempt and house arrest measures that we used to apply to actual sex offenders, but now they're more lenient to eliminate infection, which has been abandoned since by many countries other than China.
Yep.
And even then, that's caused a lot of trouble, even in China, because people are starving to death. And this was at the same time, at the start of the pandemic, when there were videos of Chinese people who had been welded into their homes. There was leaked police body cam footage where they were going around Chinese apartment blocks and people had just passed out and died in the middle of their kitchen.
Jesus.
So that was what he was endorsing at the time and knew it. If we go to the next one, a year later, he was still calling for it. Time to act, thread on why we need to close schools, borders, based, and ban all household mixing right away. And he's saying the NHS is going to be overwhelmed and bodies are going to be piled in the streets, which thankfully did not happen, of course, as we know.
Boris's policy of taking it on the chin was vindicated.
Yes,
instantly.
very much so. And it turns out that Jeremy Hunt agrees. If we go to the next one, he said when he was trying to be leader recently, I would have avoided all lockdowns.
Oh, really? Would you?
Don't let him forget this lie. This is what we have to do. We have to dredge up all the receipts for your total nonsense, because otherwise lots of people will get news headline inertia and memory hole this stuff. No, he is a fetishist for lockdowns and the totalitarian measures practiced by the Chinese government.
Isn't it weird that his sister lives in Beijing? That's
No.
weird, right?
No, it's not.
Right, okay.
Would you like to know who his wife
Yeah,
is?
I would.
Let's go next, shall we?
Yeah.
His secret weapon.
Oh,
Who is
here we
Jeremy
go.
Hunt's wife, Lucia Gu? Guo, and how many children do they have, according to The Sun? Jeremy Hunt's wife, Lucia, was born in 1978 in the city of Xi'an, China. She moved to the UK prior to meeting the Tory MP and holds British citizenship. Lucia recently regularly appeared on Sky TV's China Hour. We'll get onto that later. And presented her own
Why
show.
does Sky TV have a China hour?
Well, we'll get onto that. Called Signature Flowers of China. Together, the couple formed a real estate business called Mare Pond Properties Limited. We'll get onto that later as well. In 2019, Lucia watched her husband launch his bid to become the leader of the Conservative Party and was dubbed his secret weapon, so she's the puppeteer behind his policy positions. Jeremy and Lucia met at a Hot Courses event in Warwick in 2008. She worked at the University of Warwick, helping to recruit Chinese students to study at the university. The MP asked for her email address. After swapping contact details, the pair began a relationship. So we can go on to the next one, John. Let's see the consequences of Lucia's outreach efforts, shall we? So this is the Sunday Times, reporting that demand for university places will rise 40% in the next 4 years. Teenagers will face unprecedented competition to get into university over the next 5 years. With more than 1 million applying in 2025, a 40% increase, the admission service UCAS has warned. The projected boom over the next few years is driven by a triple whammy of a 20% rise in the number of 18-year-olds in the UK by 2026, more 18-year-olds applying to university, and a surge in overseas students led by China, whose numbers are expected to outstrip those from the whole of the EU by 2025. This year, 28,490 youngsters from China applied. And I can
It's only
speak to
because
this.
there's almost 3 times as many people in China as there are in the E EU.
Yeah, but there's also an incentive structure for universities in this country to overcharge the amount of money that foreign students get, and they pay all up front. So, for example, I recently stayed, when I started working here, in a student apartment complex in Oxford, just because they were renting rooms to non-students over the summer, and I was working at the university as well. And there were lots of Chinese students who'd already moved in for the next academic year, paid in full in advance. And my dad, for example, has worked to fit vents in the Docklands apartments and things like that, which lots of Chinese students have bought. And when they leave behind all the things they've bought, like Hamleys teddy bears, flat screen TVs, whole gaming PC rigs, and the
Chinese
cleaners.
billionaire kids. Is what you're
Yeah,
saying.
that's what's being attracted. So we're basically the sort of Singapore overnight stay for the future world leaders at this point. And Jeremy Hunt's wife has played a crucial role in encouraging that during her time at Warwick University. Also, UK universities are ideologically captured as a result of this. The number of Chinese students are set to soar. According to this, almost 29,000 candidates from China have applied to start undergraduate degrees at British universities this autumn, up from 25,800 last year and 21,250 in 2022. The UK is a popular choice, the report says. The report is by Synorbis, a digital marketing group. It predicts by 2030, about 1 in 700 Chinese in their mid-20s will have studied in Britain. So then, Tories' mounted defence against this has come from Tom Tugendhat, of the Bilderberg Group himself, and he said it was encouraging that there was such strong demand for British universities. But like any industry, we need to be careful that we don't become financially over-reliant on one country. Dependency creates weakness. Again, you're just talking about financials, not culture. The Chinese know about cultural colonization because if you go to the reporting from the newspaper, all the Confucius Institutes in the UK recently are apparently part of China's propaganda system.
Oh, what a shock.
Yeah, exactly. If you allow a fifth column to fester in your country, it undermines it. So apparently there
Just as a quick side, how many spies has America found from China? How many secrets have been sent back? It's unbelievable.
a ridiculous amount. There's actually a stat in this that the Americans have shut down 104 of the 118 Confucius Institutes.
There we go.
Yeah, because
That's
they
incredible.
were open sedition factories. The exact quote actually is this: the Confucius Institutes in the UK are, quote, formally a part of the propaganda system of the Chinese Communist Party. So the Henry Jackson Society have said there are no offshoots of the Chinese state that are integrated more closely into British society than Confucius Institutes. Open to the general public, Confucius Institutes supposedly promote the Chinese language and run classes in culture from calligraphy to cooking to Tai Chi. They also sponsor educational exchanges and hold public events and lectures. But Henry Jackson Society's report found that just 4 out of the 30 Confucius Institutes in UK universities stuck to their alleged purpose. They were instead conducting other activities like trying to shape how China is understood in the UK and attempting to forge links with British business and technology. The report also highlighted concerns that institutes are exercising an increasing interest in British politics and lobbying. It said the UK have hosted pro-China receptions in Parliament, organised diplomatic events, and flown politicians to China. It also claimed that some British politicians received funding from Confucius Institutes without naming them. Isn't that interesting? We do know that one Labour MP got $500,000 from a Chinese asset, but we don't know how many others. The Department for Education also recently tightened its position on Confucius Institutes. This week, it said the government was committed to doing more to adapt to China's growing impact and encourage people with concerns about any Confucius Institute to report them. Liz Truss has apparently adopted an increasingly hawkish position on China in recent months, with the country to be formally designated a threat soon. But I do wonder if it's going to be turned around because, of course, if you remember, Jeremy Hunt himself was part of the George Osborne Cameron doctrine of creating a new golden age for Sino-UK relations in 2015. And it seems that's coming to fruition now. Yeah. Let's see how...
Everything about this country disappoints me.
Well, it'll continue, I'm afraid. Let's see how deep the rot goes, shall we? China has opened unofficial police stations in this country.
Yeah, I've heard about this. What's the deal?
So, they've opened unofficial police stations in, like, takeout restaurants and things like that in the back rooms, but they're formally linked to the Chinese government, and they police Chinese citizens on British soil. So,
Well, all of this should be banned, obviously.
I agree,
The
but
Confucius Institute should be banned. I mean,
yeah, but they're also denying it. So, like, the Telegraph actually went to these locations and asked them, and they just got, like, told, not here, officer. They're like speakeasies. So, about 54 overseas police centres have been opened up around the world. 110 stations were named after the National Police emergency phone number in China, were established by local security bureaus in China, initially as a part of an effort to target telecom fraud abroad, but they found obviously 54 more. The police service centres are run from innocuous locations, such as Chinese restaurants or convenience stores. One of the 2 police service stations in London is registered as an estate agency, another one in Glasgow is a Chinese restaurant. The Telegraph visited the estate agency in North London, which denied any links. They said the office is also used by a legal firm. Its website says it deals with predominantly Chinese immigration issues. Another food delivery office in Croydon is said to be part of the network, also denied links when visited by a reporter. The stations are ostensibly meant to help Chinese people abroad with paperwork, such as extending Chinese driver's licenses and official documents. But the Chinese state media shows that some of the centres have been involved in collaborating with Chinese police to carry out operations abroad, such as detaining people for wrongthink, I would think. So we've got a parallel policing system at work in our country. So what's Mrs. Hunt doing now after she's sort of opened the door to all this sorts of corruption? Well, Jeremy Hunt recently faced a probe in the last couple of years about money laundering to do with his company, and that is the Mare Pond Properties, which is registered to his wife. So if we go to their company check page, obviously we can't authenticate all of this information, but some of it does look quite suspicious, because if you just scroll down to the table, John, where they report their liabilities, there's just one. Keep going. It'll be down. There we go. Yeah, if we look at the current liabilities for each year, from 2018 and 2019, they had nearly 4 million each year in stated liabilities. After the probe in 2019, it drops off to 47,000 and 17,000 in 2021.
Where did the millions of pounds of liabilities go?
That's an amazing question that has yet to be answered by our sitting Chancellor, and it's still registered to his wife, who has Chinese interests. How interesting. And when I say she has Chinese interests, I'm not being facetious there. She runs ran, I suppose, a Chinese state-funded TV program which denied the Uyghur genocide. She's the host.
Brilliant,
Yeah, wonderful. So Ju, who has Guo, who has 3 children with now the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, appears on China Hour, a series broadcast on Sky TV that showcases Chinese culture to a UK audience. It is made by the state-owned China International TV Corporation and British-based Dove Media in partnership with the communist regime's tourist office in London.
And Sky will just take whatever money they offer to make sure it's broadcast.
Well, the Climate Hour, I think, should also be regarded as an act of subversion because they're openly trying to propagandise the UK and sabotaging its energy security. Meanwhile, China's opened 252 coal-fired power plants to exceed capacity, which is going to increase global emissions about 16% alone by 2030, whereas we're 1% of emissions.
I'd just take Sky News entirely
as a sedition arm.
Yeah.
Well, so would I if anyone watched it. The programme featured reports on the effectiveness of China's post-pandemic response, hence why Jeremy Hunt fetishizes it so much, about the beauty of Xinjiang, and failed to mention its site of re-education camps for persecuted Muslim Uyghur population. Ms. Gu, who is originally from the city of Xi'an in central China, hosts a feature on the show called Signature Flowers of China. The program was praised in Beijing for its viewing figures, and its reports on the pandemic were credited with, quote, playing a unique role in communicating the Chinese narration of the epidemic to the world. 5 years ago, when Mr. Hunt led a delegation to China, the visit resulted in a deal that included UK-China Media Production Treaty and the launch of China Hour on Sky Channel 191. So Jeremy Hunt secured that for Sky and his wife explicitly while on the job and in office. And for this article, both Hunt and Gao decided not to comment. It's just open corruption. So I can't believe I'm saying it to conclude this segment. I agree with Ed Miliband. If we go to that, John.
Don't agree with Ed Miliband about much, tell you that.
Well, David Cameron just tweeted out, Britain faces a simple and inescapable choice, stability and strong government with me or chaos with Ed Miliband in 2015. And Ed Miliband, the other day on October the 14th, just tweeted a clown.
Well, I mean, how's he wrong?
Accurate.
Yeah.
So, I guess expect a Chinese-style social credit system being proposed soon. Aren't we just delighted?
Thanks for watching this segment from the podcast Lotus Eaters. If you enjoyed that, you can subscribe to our website to access our premium content, including this recent epochs that Carl and Beau have done, talking about William the Conqueror. This is part 3 of a multi-part series they have been doing. If you'd like to find even more, you can follow us on Getter at lotuseaters_com. Thank you and goodbye.